and I'm happy to be here to talk about our adventures in the screen trade.
Nice.
Okay, so if we are good now, I'm going to rephrase that question again.
Great.
Guys, we got started maybe a little earlier than we should have. But Sam and I I was recapping sort of a conversation that Sam and I had, I think maybe May one night, just talking on the phone about, and I was saying how when you come out of film school and there's this sort of expectation of you to, the auteur, I'm going to be pure, I've got to have integrity. And at some point you kind of wake up and go, this is a really great business. This is a great way to make a living. I always say it beats working for a living. But that purity, I don't know how you preserve that. I mean, occasionally, I guess there are some people, the Kubricks, but did you guys find that moment where you're like, I just want to work?
Yes, for me, it was pretty early on. I had that realization. They call it show business for a reason, because there's so much money involved, and you're always going to have producers and network executives and distributors or whatever with their own ideas of what needs to be done to make the film marketable. Or if you're working on a TV series, you're going to have to follow the formula that they've already pretty much set up. So yeah, I had to, those ideas of being the auteur, I had to kind of put those aside and really become a director for hire and try to adapt into those situations. And there's also, I just felt like we have a new reality, like every 6 months practically in this industry. And, the budgets that I had back in the 90s when I was starting out as a feature film director, the budgets have shrunk over the time, the number of days have shrunk over time. And if you're not able to adapt to that, it's just really hard. It's all about adapting and kind of staying up to date with what is expected in order to have longevity in this crazy business that we have. Mick, how did you feel?
Well, I have a little different perspective in that I need to be passionate about anything that I'm going to be spending 15-hour days for 6 days a week for months at a time. Even if it's an episode of a TV show. If it's something I wouldn't watch, it's something I don't want to make. I've been lucky enough that, the first guy to hire me as a writer was Steven Spielberg, who was the second guy to hire me as a director. So I was fortunate to start in the studio and network level and then start doing more independent things after that. But even though I create a lot of my own material, most of what I have directed has been either assignment or scripts by other people. But I've been fortunate, it's been people like Stephen King and the like. So I definitely have long dry periods between The Stand and The Shining miniseries. There was 3 years that I didn't direct anything. I was developing and stuff. But I think that if you're a filmmaker, you love making film, you love watching film, you love participating in film. And that passion, there's nothing I want to be ashamed of having made. I want to be able to every day go in and spend my 15 hours exhausting myself doing something that I love and be able to share that passion with the other, dozens of creative people I'm working with every day. So that's been more the perspective for me than it being a job. It's something I would do for free, but don't tell the people who hire me. But I've also been very, very fortunate. There are fallow periods that you have to wait out no matter who you are. And I've been able to wait those out and still be able to create things that are meaningful to me and I've been able to be completely passionate about.
That's great. And Bob, tell me your experience.
Well, what happened to me is that I think that I too narrowly defined my personal expectations for a long time. And I sort of had things framed up the way I had them framed up. And, my mentor, who I was blessed to get to work for, George Romero, and he, to me, what he was doing was what I wanted to do. And anything that fell short of what he was doing, I would just sort of beat myself up about it. And we talk about fallow periods. I mean, I've just been up and down in every decade. And I know that 1992, Bob, if you'd have said, "Hey, come write a comic book," I'd have been like, "No, I'm trying to be writer, director, producer. No, I'm not doing that," which is idiotic. And then at some point, comic books kind of revitalized my opportunities, my access to get to do things. But for me personally, what's changed, and I would say I teach. I love teaching when every chance. I love teaching class. In fact, I teach at George's at the George Romero filmmaking program outside Pittsburgh. I would say to students that I no longer made a distinction between a 2-minute and a 2-hour movie. And some smart ass kid would say like, "Yeah, well, because you're not getting a 2-hour movie." Well, I just had one in the theaters, and I still say the same thing. So I love the fact that digital right now has given us so much opportunities to do more. And I guess it loosened my grip on my own ego and just let me sort of pursue things. And sometimes you have to do stuff. I have to do stuff that I don't want to do. But I try to find a way to feel good about it. And generally speaking too, like I just did a big, well, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but I just did a big documentary project. And it was awesome. And it's the furthest thing from Frankenstein and Me or Feast of the Seven Fishes or any of my films, but I just love the form. But I find that, and I find it's not just me. I find a lot of times we talk about critics or censors, or nobody's harder on us than we are. And I think it can make the road a little rough at times.
Well, it's a very rare filmmaker who is able to be an auteur and given the keys to the kingdom. I mean, that's a handful of people, and nobody can expect that. And if you come at it like that, like I'm going to conquer the film industry, well, good luck to you.
Exactly.
But there are tributaries that form themselves from the river of experience you're traveling on, and you follow the ones. There are, mixing metaphors here, but doors of opportunity open to you that you don't expect. You can be working on your own project for 2 years, trying to get it off the ground. Suddenly you get a call. Can you be in Vancouver tomorrow because our director of this episodic television series fell out? He's sick or something happened. He's having a baby. And can you be there tomorrow and start pre-production? Well, yeah, if it's something fun and exciting that I would watch or interesting, it's a new opportunity. And then that opens doors in other areas. Doing podcasting was nothing I thought I would be doing. And suddenly I'm in my 4th year of it now. And in addition to, just creating your own opportunities, whether it's creating a Masters of Horror series or Nightmare Cinema, something like that, that's totally independent, that gets cobbled together in some way, or writing books and trying that. But being creative means being open to many, many different opportunities in many media, particularly today.
Yeah, I would echo that. At a certain point, I feel like I suffer a little bit of PTSD from development hell because as the years have gone on, there were so many passion projects that I tried to get off the ground, and it just would take years of time, and many times they would not get off the ground, way more times than the successful ones. And it just, I'm not really good at looking for work. I'm certainly not good at looking for production money. I'm not good at development hell, particularly because if I've written the material, I'm so married to it that it's very hard for me to be objective. It's very hard for me to take notes because I take everything so personally, and every word and everything is I'm the worst. But I'm the happiest when I'm on set directing. And so as years have gone on, I started getting pigeonholed into the world of directing thrillers for Lifetime and Christmas movies for Hallmark. And it got to the point where I was having so much fun just being on set. And in the last, other than 2020, which has just been a nightmare for all concerned. In 2018 and 2019, I was averaging 5 or 6 movies a year, which meant that I was spending most of my time actually doing what I love doing, which is directing. And it was such a freaking luxury. Now, those movies on those channels are obviously formulaic, and they, have a certain audience, but they're seen by millions of people. And I just have so much fun making them. And I try to elevate mine with better performances, a better look, better camera design and movement and things like that. And when I look at others that are on those channels, I do feel that I'm a cut above. And so that's the challenge that's exciting for me, is to, be in that world and make the absolute most of it, because I just have fun doing it. And it doesn't require me to go through those 2 or 3 years of trying to get the project off the ground. Now, you mentioned that writing books and those kinds of things, what I do on my time off between gigs, which is much more in my control, and I do it labor of love for me. And so that's been really kind of where my career has ended up now, where, I'll direct something if I get a call and it's financed, ready to go. I don't have to do anything. The script is approved and I just go in and direct it. I love doing that because it's a quick in and out, and then I can get back to writing that book that I'm passionate about as well. So that's kind of where I'm at this point.
Yeah, but if you're a filmmaker, you're a filmmaker, and you take the opportunities presented to you. I'm not good at selling myself or selling things or putting money together, financing. I hate that part of it. I don't like it. And it's quite terrific that you've been able to do 5 movies a year. I do one every couple of years if I'm lucky, and doing the occasional episodics and things like that. And book authoring has become an important part of my life. But also in terms of that auteur theory, if it costs millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to make movies, and for you to be so arrogant as to think that my idea is the primary idea, anybody who questions me is wrong and an asshole and I won't do it. Well, goodbye. See you in another occupation. You have to be part of a team. You've got actors, you've got cinematographer, you've got art directors, you have all of these people involved in cooking this delicious banquet, and every one of them has to have special talents, and you all have to be on the same page, but you also need to be inspired by those people around you. And even studio executives occasionally have good ideas, and you can't be so arrogant as to reject them because they weren't yours. Your ego is not the most important thing. You have to have a strong one to be able to take command of a group of creative people, but you have to be open to ideas that are better than yours. And I am eager to get those.
Mick, you just said, I think, and I always try to say to people, it's about the work. If you make it about the work, you'll do good work, and not make it about you. But what you said, it's so true. I mean, I say all the time, I want that kid who's the PA, it's his first job. I want him to understand the film we're making too. And I want it to be his or hers. I want this notion that somehow, I don't know. I mean, the older I get, the more I just become so hyper aware of the collaborative nature of it. And that may sound silly, but it's funny, as inveterate fanboy that I am, and someone who knew Sam's fanzine in the 70s. I mean, we moan about the fact that, why on the set of, Horror of Dracula or Ghost of Frankenstein or something, didn't they just keep X, Y, and Z, and why weren't they documenting it? And yet when we're in the middle of doing those things, we're trying to get through the day. You're trying to, and when you're trying to get through the day, it's just so much better when everybody's pulling in the same direction. And sometimes you have people working against you, but that's one of the things that irks me is when I always hear about the evil people of Hollywood. And, the vast majority of people that I've worked with, worked for, worked around have been great people. Every industry has its assholes.
Absolutely. And you don't have to work with the assholes, or if you do, sometimes you come into a project that has actors who are unpleasant or picking fights, things like that. But you have to be a psychologist. You have to learn how to work with people. You've got all these creative people who are there because they're talented and have proven themselves in their certain field. But you have to know on that first day of shooting, even if you didn't get time to do rehearsals before shooting, who takes longer to warm up, who's great on their first take and slows down as they go on, who takes a while to ramp up, and you shoot their coverage accordingly. And that goes with the crew as well. What are they best at? What do they need inspiration from? You're there to be a cheerleader and to encourage and not discourage. You're not there to pick fights. You're not there to bull your weight around. You are there to make the best movie possible.
No, I totally agree with that. And I prepare my films just, probably more than anybody. I studied Hitchcock. I started out my career as Brian De Palma's assistant, and he certainly prepares his films meticulously, storyboarding and everything. I'm not much of an artist, but I do shot list the scenes very, very specifically. So when I go in with the game plan, I know exactly what I want. But at the same time, you have to leave yourself open for the collaboration that you're talking about, Mick, where actors are going to have ideas that you haven't thought of. The cinematographer is going to have ideas that you might not have thought of. Everybody. And so I always leave myself really open and listen to all of the input and ideas from anybody on set. I don't care if it's a production assistant. I'm open to that. And I treat everybody as a family, and as we're all trying to make the best thing we possibly can. But ultimately, I'm the captain of the ship, and I've got to make the decision and move on and not spend too much time with discussion on set about this.
Exactly. You've got the big picture in mind. Everybody else has their own individual department in mind. And as much as you plan, and I do the same thing, I'll shot list the whole week's work over the weekend.
Yeah.
You have to roll with the punches because changes are thrown at you every single day. And there'll be days when at the end of the day, I'll look and, wow, I shot my shot list. And another day where I planned it and it's like, I didn't do one of these shots that I was planning, but
exactly.
Roll with it. You have to be prepared psychologically as well as technically.
No, exactly. And you can also, when you get into a corner and you're running out of time, or the sun's going down and you have sometimes just thinking of, how do I shoot this simply? How can I do it in one shot instead of the 5 that I have scheduled? And many times that becomes even better, the simplicity of it or whatever. It just, so you can't look at it as, oh my God, this is a disaster. You have to look at it as though it's an opportunity for a rethink.
Exactly.
I was commenting on that. My wife just, what I love when you decide to do something like this and you tell your whole family, hey, just 1 hour. Just 1 hour. And they're like beating on the windows and I don't know what. Anyway, but I think what that preparation is not you working in concrete. That preparation is you building a foundation that you can then improvise from. And it's liberating. And it is the one. I'm glad when I was 16, I read all that stuff about Hitchcock and the Truffaut book and all that, stuff, because it did create good habits, I think. I wanted to, Anthony was sending some questions our way. I do want to make one more point, because both of you, Mick, you mentioned podcasts, which was late to the party, but I'm really enjoying podcasts now about myriad subjects. And Sam, you did something marvelous in the last couple of years with Dick Clemenson with Little Shop of Horrors. You did incredible deep dive into a wonderful Frankenstein adaptation, Frankenstein: The True Story, which is really, I think, a significant piece of filmmaking, and you did significant work in documenting it. And I know for myself, like I just made a short essay film that I narrate them in about planting beneficial pollinator planting in Appalachia. That is just, there's no money in it. It's just me getting to express myself. I think it's so healthy. It's so healthy right now to have these tools to be able to create and express this way. And I promised Anthony I'll get to the follow-up, but I just wanted to make note of that because I love that you guys are creating all the time. And then particularly Sam, I hope you go after another project like that. But Anthony had asked me, did I have a story about working with Burt Reynolds? And I had almost referenced something earlier because I've been blessed to work with a lot of really talented people. And working with Burt obviously it was an incredible thing to get to do. It was a difficult thing to get to do at times for a lot of reasons. And I told somebody this, he looked at me at one point after blowing up and he said, you know, imagine being the biggest movie star in the world and then not. And he was very cognizant of that. You know, he's very, and I think everyone who's had any success in the industry to some degree has to experience that. And that's why I always say, like, just make it about the work. Don't make it about yourself. And you can get through this with some shreds of your mental health. But the thing that I loved about Burt, the thing that I absolutely loved about him is when he would look at me and he would say, Bobby, what are you on? And do 85. And he'd go, I mean, he knew where, he knew what the framing was. He knew, because he was a director, and I like Sharky's Machine. I mean, I think he was actually a good director, and I know he directed a lot of TV. But for me, it's like I felt like I was working with somebody who was just that one cut above, and not just because they'd been a charismatic movie star, but because they were a craftsperson. Michael Ironside was like that. Well, how about you guys? Have you guys experienced that?
Well, Burt directed one of the episodes of Amazing Stories, which was my first job in the movie. And, when you work with people who have not only established themselves with their talent, but with their success, you learn a lot from that. My first screenwriting job, as I said, was on Amazing Stories, and that was for Steven Spielberg. It was a baptism by fire, and I learned so much, and it was such an incredible experience. And with some actors, I worked with Tony Perkins when I was doing Psycho 4, and he knew more about that character than anybody and wasn't afraid of letting anybody know that. And he was a very complicated actor to work with who had wanted to direct Psycho 4 because he'd done Psycho 3, and the lack of critical or financial success Psycho 3 had made the studio say no, and instead they hired the guy who directed Critters 2. And so I had to prove myself every day, and he was constantly testing me and that sort of thing. So, but that helps you grow, and it helps you learn. Again, there's another kind of actor who needs another kind of support when you are the director, trying to be the safety net. And you want your actors to feel safe in unleashing anything so they can be fearless. And you learn that through people who've had that level of success, aside from a level of talent. And that was something that was really revelatory to me in 1990 when we made it.
Well, the two examples come to mind in my career. The very first professional gig I ever had was on The Fury, the De Palma film, in 1977. It was between my junior and senior year in college. And I went up to Chicago and worked as a production assistant and did a little work as an extra. But I'd also gotten an assignment from Cinefantastique to write a journal on the making of the film, which allowed me to have one-on-one interviews with Kirk Douglas and John Cassavetes and everybody involved in the movie, in front of the camera and behind the camera, with De Palma, of course, and the composer John Williams and the editor Paul Hirsch, who did Star Wars. It was just this incredible people involved. But the thing that impressed me that I carry to this very day was the first day that Kirk Douglas walked onto the set. He walked around and introduced himself to every single crew member, asked their name and what they did. And on day 2, he came in and he went around and he said, "How you doing, Joe? How you doing, Smitty?" He made a point of remembering every person's name. And I'm telling you, that crew would have gone to the ends of the earth for this guy. I mean, the respect that he commanded was just unbelievable. And I do that on my films. I learn
That's
everyone's
very
name.
important. Yeah.
So important. And as I was saying earlier, it's a family. You're all there together. I don't care if you're, doing a production assistant job or the producer, you're the same in my book. It's like everybody is treated equal. And I learn their names, and at the end of every day I go around and shake hands and thank them. I just think it's so critically important to do that. And the other example was my first feature that I directed was Guilty as Charged. And the star of it was Rod Steiger, this legendary Oscar-winning actor who I had heard all sorts of stories was hard to tame and was going to be difficult. And so I was, a wee bit nervous and apprehensive as to how that was going to go. And the first day we started with he gives this big sort of monologue at a podium, and we shoot the wide shot or the master, and then we go in for some coverage. And Rod said, "Now Sam, what is the framing on the next shot?" And I said, "Well, it's about, chest up." And he says, "Oh, good." And he unbuckles his pants and drops them to the floor. And he says, "It's hot in here." And so he shot all the coverage standing there in his boxer shorts. And I just thought, it was the last thing in the world I expected from this, amazing, amazing actor. But it just kind of shows you, the illusion of film, and that he had been around enough to know that he could get away with that. And he did. And he tested me for the first couple of days, maybe, but he was very impressed with the amount of preparation that I brought to the table. And once he could trust that I knew what I was doing, then he was a pussycat. It was incredible. I absolutely loved the guy. And he ended up coming back and doing another film with me a couple years later. And he was just brilliant. So you just have to, earn their respect, basically, when it's a legendary person like that. It's my first film and it's their, 100th or something. And, but it became a mutual admiration thing between me and Rod. It was just great.
Sam, I got to tell you, in addition, now I was actually on the set of Guilty as Charged one day.
That's right.
Yeah, I was on the set, but unfortunately not the day that Rod pulled his pants down. But we did a film with Rod in Canada. My brother Jeff produced, and it was really funny because Rod and he did a great job in the film, but he was definitely, he was pushing. And those films were like Disney Channel would pick them up. They were fairly modestly budgeted. And I remember he was giving my brother a hard time because my brother said, "Hey, you're flying in this day. We're going to do your fitting the next day. We have one scene at the hospital. Can we have you do the scene with this?" Or I forget how it was, or no, "Can we get your reverse on this or something? And then we'll intercut it like a doctor comes or a kid comes and talks to him or something." And Rod starts yelling at my brother about his integrity and "I can't do that. And it's not fair." And Jeff goes, "Well, when I was a kid in college, I used to work at this store, and every night Entertainment Tonight would come on, and you were on Entertainment Tonight talking about the Amityville Horror. And you were talking about how you did this scene, and through the magic of movies, you shot your stuff. And then they shot their stuff and cut it together, and you had never met any of these people." And Rod was real quiet for a minute. He goes, "All right, I'll be there." He rolled over.
Shame sometimes works. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
How about Mick? How about you? The same? Well, no, actually, I'm not about Rod Steiger. Oh no, I'm sorry. I missed Anthony's question. Anthony sends these questions and they come up really quick and then they go away and then I have to try to recreate. So actually, Sam, this is for you.
Okay.
I think you muted yourself.
How did you
Uh-oh. Oh no, your audio is really bad, Bob. I can't understand you.
connection with
Bad connection.
and Elvira's Haunted Hills come from? We have a question from the audience.
Say it one more time. It's
Me?
about Elvira's Haunted Hills and what?
Sam, are you there?
Yeah, I can't. Your audio is really bad.
Yeah, you're breaking up. Picture is frozen.
Oh crap.
Okay,
he's gone now.
I'm gonna wing it. I don't know what the question was, but it's about Elvira's Haunted Hills.
Wait, Suzanne said something. Suzanne, what were you saying?
Hi, sorry for interrupting. It seems like we lost Bob. I'm going to keep an eye to see if he's going to come back. Meanwhile,
Okay.
I'm going to promote Anthony Taylor as a panelist, as audio, and he can ask y'all questions because
Awesome.
He has them.
Okay.
All right, great. Shoot.
Hey, Anthony.
Hey guys, thanks for doing this again. This is going very well, except for Bob dropping out. My question for you, Sam, was how did you get the job directing Elvira's Haunted Hills?
Well, all right. So I was a huge fan of Elvira. I'd seen her hosting stuff, and I'd also seen her first film, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, which I thought was hilarious. And and that was 1989-ish, I guess, was her first film. And then my first film, Guilty as Charged, came out in 91. And I went to a party in Hollywood thrown by Terry Sweeney, who was on Saturday Night Live in the 80s. He was the first openly gay cast member, and he always did Nancy Reagan in drag. And anyway, I was a good friend of his. And at the party, I saw Cassandra Peterson across the way, and I'm like, Terry, you have to introduce me to her. So he introduced me, and I said, I'm such a fan of yours. And Terry said, oh, by the way, Sam directed Guilty as Charged. And Cassandra went, oh my God, I just saw that movie. I loved it. In fact, I've been wanting to meet you because if I ever do another Elvira film, I want you to direct it. And I was like, what? And how many drinks have you had? And, it just I couldn't quite believe that would ever work out. But I stayed in touch with her, and she did a little cameo in one of my other films called Acting on Impulse, not as Elvira, but as a sort of Dolly Parton-ish bouncer at a country western bar. She got a big blonde wig and was hilarious. And we became friends. Years went by. She was trying to get another Elvira film going. And she and her husband finally decided they're just going to finance it themselves. And so she called me up and she said, hey, I know I had sort of promised you this gig a long time ago, but we've been considering other directors, but we want to give you a shot and have you come in for a meeting. So I went in, she hands me the script and she goes, this is Elvira's Haunted Hills. It's a spoof of the Vincent Price, Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies of the 60s. Are you familiar with those? And I go, Cassandra, are you kidding me? Here is the monologue that Vincent Price gives at the end of Pit and the Pendulum. Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You are about to enter hell. Hell, the netherworld, the infernal region, the abode of the damned, a place of torment, Gehenna, Naraka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny, thus the condition of man bound on an island from which he can never or hope to escape, surrounded by the waiting pit of hell, which must destroy him finally. And she kind of cocked her head like I was absolutely nuts, and then said, "You're hired." And that's how it came about. And I knew that monologue as I had memorized it in grade school when they gave us an acting assignment. And back in those days, which was long before video cassette and everything, I recorded movies off of TV on reel-to-reel tapes. And I had bitten the pendulum, and I transcribed that damn thing. And I told that, you know, of course, the teacher thought I was doing Edgar Allan Poe, but of course it was Richard Matheson.
Hey, we can see and hear Bob now.
Yes.
Welcome back, Bob.
Thank you. Mick, can I ask, because about the time I came of age, I mean, Stephen King was a lightning bolt into my like 17, 18-year-old head. And coincidentally, the first feature that I did, like getting paid regularly, was Creepshow. So, you know, I got to spend a lot of time around him, and that was like, for a kid, you know, like 19-year-old kid, to get to spend 6 months doing that was just unbelievable. Best present ever. But for you, I mean, how can you just sort of riff a little bit on that process and really taking on such iconic properties, and just how did you approach it, and how did it feel? What was it like?
Well, Stephen King is one of the best collaborators any filmmaker could ever hope to have. He's a gentleman. He's a lot of fun. He's like a big kid on a playing with a train set when it's on the set of one of his movies, if he's truly involved, as he was in the Stand miniseries and the Shining miniseries. But it started with something that was not based on one of his books, and that was an original screenplay of Sleepwalkers. So that was something I met on it. The studio liked my knowledge of his work and my enthusiasm for it. I've told this story before, but they said, we love you. We think you're perfect for this. We have a relationship with another agent who represents a client we have to meet with tomorrow, but don't worry, you've got it. They hired the other director. The other director started taking it into a direction of his own, talking about the auteur theory. And it soon became apparent that Stephen King would not put his name above the title of Director X's Sleepwalkers, when he completely rewrote and disregarded King's original screenplay. So they called me up and asked me to lunch, and we had lunch and talked about it. And what I didn't know is they were moving me into my production office on the Columbia lot at that time. No idea I was getting the job until I was there. And then we started working together. My job as a writer-director was to bring it back to the Stephen King end of things and address excuse me, studio notes that they might have. And so it also became a series of phone calls with Stephen King. The studio thinks that something should happen like here. Do you want me to take a crack at it? And he said, no, let me do it. And the next day there'd be 6 brilliant pages in the fax machine, if you remember those. And so we never met until shooting his cameo with Clive Barker and Tobe Hooper that day. And it was so great. He was only there for 2 hours. And it's a scene, it's a shot. All 3 of them are in one shot that moves from one to the next. And you could cut that shot out and throw it away and not have any impact on the movie, except you guys and the fans, the genre faithful, are going to be in the Chinese theater on opening day going, look, there's Stephen King. Look, there's Clive Barker. Look, there's Tobe Hooper. And so the sense of fun with King, and then when it turned out to be so successful, and he liked how I handled the film so much. He was not on set except for those 2 hours. When The Stand came up, he asked me if I would be interested in directing it. And of course, now I'd had a #1 movie in theaters, and I thought, I don't want to do television. Then it's like, but wait, it's The Stand.
The Stand.
You know, King wrote the script himself, all 460 pages of it. It was great. And I'd never done anything of scope before. The biggest thing I'd ever done was Critters 2 with a pickup truck battling a giant critter ball in the wilds of Santa Clarita. So here is this massive book, his bestseller of all time, his most beloved book to this day. A great script, $28 million budget to do it. And of course, I was thrilled to be asked. And actually had one of the best experiences of my life. And not just as a filmmaking experience where every day there was no light at the end of the tunnel of a 100-day shoot because you were lucky to see the tunnel at all. And half of the time, off and on, King was there. He was an actual executive producer as well as the screenwriter, and such a great collaborator and cheerleader. People often think I must be Stephen King's bitch because we worked so often together. But there's never been one time in the 8 or so projects we've done together that he's ever said, you know, I think you should do it this way. But he's always been there as a resource. If I want to bounce something off of him and get his opinion, there's no better, more accessible person for that opinion to be given from than Stephen King. And we became friends on that shoot because we spent so much time together. We have so much in common in our lives, brought up by a single mother in rather not very good financial circumstances, very blue collar lives, and a lot of the same touchstones with the Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson and the Hammer films and the Corman classics and things like that. And it became a friendship as well as a wonderful working collaboration. So there's nothing better than working with Stephen King when he's on your set.
Wow, that's incredible to hear. I love that.
He's the best, incredibly generous in every sense.
I hate when you have a story that could almost be incredible, because I almost have an incredible Stephen King story and it blew up on me. Because the one great thing I have is, you know, that picture of Bill Clinton with John F. Kennedy, you know, like he's like a teenager, right?
Yes.
Well, I have that picture, but it's me between George Romero and Stephen King. And it looks like they're conferring with me on set, but really they're probably just giving me a coffee, go get my coffee or something.
Your
but
picture's
it's just
better.
But I somehow during the shooting of Creepshow, a friend of mine was at a class somewhere on campus in Pittsburgh, and he goes, "Hey, they're going to show Horror of Dracula, like a nice 16 print." And back then, you know, where was I going to see it? You know, I got to see it maybe if it came around, you know, on your TV, and I'd seen it once projected. So I go to this class, and the teacher pretty much, after it was a genre class, he kind of quasi trashes Terence Fisher, which that was my other big influence. And I'm like, well, now I'm angry. And then he's just trashing people, and he trashes Stephen King.
Oh.
So the next day,
not very knowledgeable about the genre.
No. And I actually get into an argument with the guy at one point, and I leave, and I'm so pissed off that the next day I go in, and he was, Stephen and Tabby King were, I forget what they were sitting in an editing room or something. And I came in and I just told him everything with my outrage. And I go, "I am begging you to come with me to this asshole's class next week. And he's like, he looks at her, he's like, "Do you think I should do it?" And she's like, "Do it." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm going to make fanboy history. It's going to be the greatest thing ever." And he got called out of town. And we never got to do it. And he was gone for 3 weeks in the class.
Because he would have done that. He would have done that.
Oh, I just wanted to walk in with it, because it was like, remember Woody Allen in Annie Hall when they're talking, the guy
Marshall McLuhan.
Yeah. "You know nothing of my work."
Yes.
You mean my whole fallacy is incorrect.
And in walks the 6'5" Stephen King. And
Yeah.
Hard to miss.
That's incredible. Well, I feel name droppy, but I guess that's why we're here. And you mentioned Terence Fisher, who for me is a total idol. And when I graduated from high school, I bamboozled my parents into sending me to England so I could interview a lot of the Hammer Film folks for my fanzine, Bazaar. And I sought out Terence Fisher and went to his home and interviewed him and everything. And he was the most humble, sweetest guy, and was so astonished that I knew so much about his films. You know, he kept saying, "You know more about them than I do," kind of thing. And he couldn't believe it. And at that time, it was 1974. He was, you know, people, there weren't I guess, opportunities for people to interview him very much. He hadn't really been interviewed a lot. So it was an incredible, incredible experience to have that. And, you know, he didn't live much longer beyond that. And so that was one of the really, really great lucky moments.
I got to go get something to show you guys just because of this. And it's kind of interesting.
Meanwhile, now we play the music, the filler music.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a quick question for you, Mick.
Yes.
I know that you wrote the script for The Fly 2, which another of our guests this weekend, Chris Wallace, directed.
He's a wonderful guy.
He is. And I wonder how that experience was for you.
Well, it was an interesting experience because I started writing something entirely different that had to do with the right to life movement and all, because Veronica was going to have Seth Brundle's child at the end of The Fly. And so it was my idea to turn it into something that had some social consciousness like Cronenberg's movie did. And I was moving along, writing it, something entirely my own original take that went in places that were unexpected. And there was a regime change and there were a lot of fights. And Scott Rudin was the executive on The Fly 2 at the time, who was very supportive of what I was doing. But then Leonard Goldberg of Spelling Goldberg, the producers of The Love Boat, became the head of the studio. And he wanted a teenage monster movie. So it was really a battle. And I got halfway through my original one. Then they wanted another take. So I wrote an entirely different screenplay, a couple of drafts of that. And then I got offered the opportunity to rewrite and direct Critters 2. And so that would turn out to be my first feature film. So going from screenwriter to director, I didn't get to work with Chris at all. He was hired after the fact, but I've known Chris for years, and he's, first of all, a brilliant makeup effects guy. He did the makeup effects for the original Fly, the Cronenberg movie, and then moved into the director's chair for Fly 2. And he did The Vagrant, and he's done some really fascinating work and is a really talented guy. And I would love to have had the opportunity to work with him directly as his screenwriter, where he is in the director's chair, because I have a lot of admiration for the guy as a human being and as a director and as an incredible makeup effects artist and artist in general.
Hey guys, we had a question come in. Asking us, what is your favorite memory of a kind of a spontaneous collaborative moment with creatives, like what we were talking about earlier? Anything come to mind?
Okay. On Elvira's Haunted Hills, we had, we wanted Fabio to play this hunky guy that would be the stable hunk that she would, that Elvira would hook up with. And he turned it down, and we said, okay, well, we're running out of money anyway. We're going to cast this when we get over to Romania, which is where we shot it. And we'll cast someone local there. So we started reading actors there, and nobody could speak English. And it was just not going well. But then this guy walked into the room. He had long hair. He looked like a romance novel cover model. And but he literally could not even speak English phonetically. It was just hopeless. And so it suddenly struck me, okay, what if we let him just speak all his lines in Romanian, and then we post-dub it very badly, like the Italian Hercules movies in the 50s or something. And Cassandra, oh my God, that would be hilarious. But do you think it'll work? Because he keeps reappearing several scenes in the movie. Isn't it gonna be just a one joke thing and it's gonna get tiresome? Well, we took this chance and did it. And oh my God, when we show the movie at screenings with an audience, it gets the biggest laughs in the freaking movie. and then the subsequent scenes, before he's even opened his mouth, the audience is already laughing because they're anticipating what's coming. And anyway, that was something that just completely came organically, during the process.
Well, the first one that comes to mind for me is a spur of the moment thing that I was forced to make, because during the making of Psycho 4, we're setting up this shot where Tony Perkins is talking to CCH Pounder, calling into a talk show, the subject of which is matricide. So in the script that Joseph Stefano had written, who wrote the original Psycho, he gets furious and takes a butcher knife and slams it into a butcher board. Now, we've gone through every page of the script before we started shooting, just to make sure, and we talked about everything you could imagine. And that's a lot when you're working with Tony Perkins, which was great and occasionally occurs. So we walk onto the set, everybody's getting ready, and we're doing our rehearsal. And he said, "Now, Mick, this butcher knife, don't you think it's kind of old and hoary and cliched?" And it's I said, "Well, actually, I think it's kind of good." But he went on about it for literally 20 minutes or so. And finally, I had to say, let's step off the stage and talk about it. Let the crew do their job and set up the lighting, get everything done that needs to be done. And there was a lot that did. And off the set, it was like, "Here, how about this?" I looked at craft services and I said, "How about you're just so furious? You've got an apple in your hand and it twists in half rather than," and so it's, Adam and Eve's apple there. And he liked that, and we ended up shooting it. So it was just rolling with the punches that came up. It's not a genius scene or a fantastic element, but it made him happy. And it was even better than a butcher knife into a butcher board.
That's great. I love that.
Great.
It's
Bob,
how about you?
Something.
I think for me, the one that I'm thinking of, sometimes there's surprising things. Like when I was doing Feast of Seven Fishes, I was convinced that Joey Pants wasn't going to do the movie, and I was shooting something else, and the phone rang and it was him. And we talked for 45 minutes about how to stuff calamari on Christmas Eve, an Italian Christmas Eve. And he's like, "All right, I'll be there." And then he just came and did the movie, But I remember once with Burt, there's this scene in Frankenstein and Me where the children they try to build the Hollywood sign in their backyard. They live out in Victorville, in the Mojave, and they're building the Hollywood sign. And Burt and I talked about it, and we added a shot. I brought him back out one evening. We did it at nighttime, and just of him looking at the sign and then walking away, because the things were going on with his character. The dad had an interest in creativity in Hollywood too, had never done anything with it. And he said, "Bob, give me a minute." Well, he'd always call me Bobby. "Give me a minute." And then there were tears in his eyes. And even though it was a wide shot and you saw those tears, the light, the HMIs just caught it, just glimmered just right. And it, it's no good to be falsely humble. When you've done something that's good, when you have that moment, you're like, this is a really kick-ass iconic sort of image here to have this person in this moment. And it just evolved and it happened. And I think that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning about when you're prepared and you're not going to lose your way, you can afford to try some things. You can be open not only to collaboration, but to improvisation. And that's a great thing. So, I'm so grateful. I don't know about you guys. I feel so privileged and grateful. And by the way, I'm going to tell you guys this real quick. The low part of my career, and I'm like, I'm never going to work again. A really good friend of mine, Mark Miller, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, wrote a lot of really good stuff about Hammer. And he and I were at a wedding somewhere, and he listened to me and was just a good friend. And a week later, I got a package from him, and he was telling me how he had gone to visit with Terry Fisher in London. And he said, we had this wonderful time, interviewed him for a couple of days. And he goes, and when I left, I had him make a handprint on 2 pieces of paper. He brought out ink. I said, why? He goes, I don't know. I just did it. And he goes, I want you to have this. And every time you think of quitting, I want you to look at it and not quit.
Whoa.
It was the most unselfish, coolest thing that anyone has ever done for me, ever. And I've had a lot of people do really kind things for me.
That's spectacular. Have you ever thought of quitting?
No, I'm not that smart. I'm not that smart.
That's a big if. I can't imagine. And I agree with you. I feel fortunate every day. I am gratified every day for the course my life has taken. It has far exceeded anything I had imagined, to being able to make the kind of movies and books and television that I love, that I'm passionate about, and to have been able to do it for decades and still continue to be it being a vital part of my life. You know, I'm grateful every day.
Here.
We've got some questions.
Okay. Aren't we running out of time? Aren't we running up against the end here?
I think so. Yeah, I think we're we may be. No, those were questions I already answered. I don't even know what time it is. Does anybody know what time it is?
12:30 in LA.
Okay. Anthony?
Yep, it's time to go. Thanks so much. And also, we just wanted to mention again, if you're enjoying this panel, please donate to the MPTF. There's a link in the chat here. There's a link in the chat on YouTube and below the screen on YouTube and all over the websites. Please support the MPTF.
Thanks,
Great.
Anthony.
Because thanks for having us.